Welcome everyone to the second talk of today. We'll have a different topic on ecosystems. So we'll be very happy to have Valentina Ros give us some ideas on the managed spaces ecosystem with multiple fixed points.
Yes, thank you.
So I really like this.
Thank you. And I really like this place, so I really need to thank the organizers for setting this up and bringing me here. And also thanks for giving me some time to present some work to you here. So this is work, the most recent part of which is done together with Thomas Luis Sarola, who is a PhD student at the LPTMS, that is a lab in Paris-Saclay. So this is south of Paris. And I will show also some plots which come from previous work done together with the list of people that you see below. So it's work that in some sense has to do with spin glass theory, meaning that what we do here is to look at systems of dynamical equations. And it turns out that these systems of dynamical equations can exhibit multi-stability in the sense that there can be multiple fixed points of these equations, which are competing in attracting the dynamics of the system itself. And this is similar to what you have in spin glasses, where your dynamics is optimization of some underlying landscape. And this landscape can be non-convex. So you have a lot of local minima or metastable states that can attract your dynamics. And these are in competition with each other. And let's say the more biological aspect to this is related to the fact that I'm going to tell you about equations which arise in a given toy model that is supposed to describe high-dimensional population dynamics, and in particular, so to say, very diverse ecosystems. So you think about ecosystems which are made of a huge number of species that all coexist in a given region of space, so they all see each other's, meaning that there is high connectivity in the interactions between these species, and you want to understand the dynamics of these populations. And this dynamics, in general, has some out-of-equilibrium features, which are actually pretty interesting and pretty rich. So I just took examples of paper where you see these keywords like chaos, turnover, booms, and catastrophic shifts. So there is interesting dynamics in here. And what we want to understand is if we can say something about these dynamics, which is, in fact, quite difficult to solve, even in the context of simple toy models, by doing something much simpler, that is just look at the statistical properties of the fixed points of these dynamical equations. So if I had to, let's say, rephrase this question in the language of stat phys, I would say that we are trying to see if we can say something about out-of-equilibrium dynamics through some static calculations, because fixed points are solutions of equations that do not depend on time any longer, so I don't need to solve the dynamics to understand their statistical properties. Okay, so what I'm going to do in this talk is first to give you a very simple example. This is quite old. It's low dimensional, but just to motivate why one could expect that regimes which have this fluctuating out of equilibrium dynamics, so which are actually never at a fixed point, may still be influenced by properties of the fixed points. And then I'll tell you essentially the model for which we want to ask the same type of questions. This is now high-dimensional models. So for people in the audience that work on these things, this is going to be generalized Lotka-Volterra equations with random interactions. I will rephrase a bit more precisely these questions in connection to this model, and I will tell you then what we find, just 3 results that we find about the statistics of the fixed points of these equations. Okay, so let me begin with this very simple example. This comes from this rather old paper of May and Leonard, where it was formulated there, I think, in terms of, again, in ecosystems where you have 3 species that interact with each other, and the interactions are competitive in some sort of loop structure. And if you look at modern literature, sometimes it is rephrased in terms of game theory. So they refer to this game that I think is familiar, I hope, to anybody in this room, that is the paper rock scissor game. So the idea is that, I don't know, you have all of these people in this room, we are all players. We have to play this game, and at each instance of time, we have to choose among 3 possible strategies that I label with 1, 2, 3. So this is paper, rock, and scissors. And these strategies are in a competition because you know that paper is stronger than rock in this game, and rock is stronger than scissors, and in turn, scissor is stronger than paper. So what you can do is to write down some simple dynamical equations. So now my variable xi here is a fraction, so it's the fraction of players that decides to adapt a given strategy I at a given time. And this fraction changes in time, and you see this peculiar product structure of the equations of motion that you usually have in population dynamics. So the frequency of strategy I changes according to xi, multiplied by something that I can think of as some effective growth rate of that strategy. And this effective growth rate depends on the strategies, on the other strategies, and on their frequencies, and you have these coefficients that are the interactions. So alpha and mu are positive, you have a minus sign, so this gives you competitive interactions. So this is a very simple system of equations, so you can actually solve it, but you can do something much simpler, that is to ask, what are the fixed points of these equations? And you realize that if you put yourself in this regime here, actually the solution is extremely simple. So you have just three fixed points, which are the pure strategies. So you see them immediately. So the configuration where everybody plays paper, or everybody plays scissors, or everybody plays rock. And of course, these are dynamically unstable, right? Because if everybody plays paper and then I introduce a little fraction of players that decides to play rock, then through these equations, the system realizes that rock is a little bit better, so it will start flowing along these heteroclinic orbits in the direction of the other fixed point. So there is dynamical instability. And if I now decide to, I don't know, start from an initial condition that is somewhere in the bulk of this space, so where I have a finite frequency for all the strategies, what I will see is that my system starts spiraling toward the boundary of my configuration space. And it does it in a way that is slower and slower. So it will spend larger and larger windows of time close to one of these fixed points until it realizes, oh, this is unstable. So it will faster flow away, go in the vicinity of the other one, and so on and so forth. So this becomes slower and slower, but it is never ending. So you have a dynamics where you have this, let's say, sequential dominance of strategies, but with a constant turnover between the different strategies. So it's clearly a dynamics that is never at a fixed point, but obviously is a dynamics that is highly dominated by the fixed points. So if I can say what are the properties of the fixed points, I understand how the system behaves in its large time limit. So this is a bit the idea that we have in mind, and somehow we would like to understand if we can say something similar now in a high dimensional context. So when we look at dynamical equations that are not too different from what I showed before, but where now the number of strategies, if you want, so I will call them species, is very large. So D is some parameter that I will send to infinity in the following. And the X here is some rescale abundance. So it is not a frequency. They don't sum to one. It's just counting, if you want, how many individuals I have of the given species. And then I do some rescaling to write the equations in a simpler form. And I will treat this as a real variable. So in principle, an abundance is a natural number, but then I rescale, I assume that they are large enough that I can neglect issues of discreteness of these variables. And you see the equation of motion is similar, except that, so I still have these interactions that are binary, but now I treat them as random variables, Gaussian statistics. I have some non-zero average that I call mu there, and correlations are very simple. So the alpha ij that tells me how strong the degree of freedom J, the species J affects the dynamics of the species I, is correlated only with alpha Ji. So correlations are only for fixed pair of species. And they have this gamma parameter there, which encodes for the reciprocity or the symmetry. So if gamma is equal to 1, it means alpha J is exactly equal to alpha Ji. So I have symmetric interactions. If gamma is smaller than 1, they may be correlated statistically, but they are not exactly identical. And gamma 0 means that all the entries of my matrix are independent from each other. Okay, so this is a very simple toy model. It was introduced long ago in the literature. And if you look at, let's say, more modern literature, there's a lot of extremely interesting variations that build on this. So this is a fully connected model. Everybody interacts with everybody. You can add sparsity. You can structure a bit this interaction matrix. Maybe you have subcommunities that interact more strongly with themselves than with the other species. You can add space. This is ecology, so you can couple it with evolution. So there's a lot of research that is going on in different directions. But here I will really stick to this simple formulation. So I just have dynamical equations fully connected, quench randomness. The only thing that I will comment on, so the only, let's say, variation to this equation comes from possibly adding some migration. So I can open the system and allow, and this is done by adding, for example, a constant factor of lambda to all of my equations of motion. This means that there is a constant influx of abundance of the species that sustain all the populations in my system. So I'm opening, if you want, the ecosystem to the exterior. And if I am in such a situation, let me just comment, I will maybe talk about extinction or being close to extinction. This would mean that for the species I that I'm focusing on, the abundance is of the order of this migration. So this is telling you that that species is there just because you have this external flux, and possibly if you switch this flux to 0, the species would be extinct. Okay, so what do we know about this model? So again, this was introduced quite long ago, end of the 80s. So already in these papers, people realized that if I look at the dynamics in the limit d going to infinity, and I start from random initial conditions, meaning I extract randomly my initial vector of abundances, I would see a transition in the strength of sigma. So sigma is the variability of the interactions, or if you want, the disorder. So if sigma is small, my dynamics is simple in the sense that I reach stationarity and I reach a fixed point, and this fixed point turns out to be unique with respect to perturbations. So it's dynamically stable. So if I perturb a bit trajectories here, I go back to the same configuration, and also unique with respect to the initial conditions. So dynamics sees such a unique fixed point. I cross this critical value of sigma, and I enter into instead this phase where I have these oscillations.
Sorry, I'm a bad student here. I forgot what sigma is.
Sigma is the variance of my Gaussian interaction couplings. So, okay.
The alpha. Strength of the.
Yes, exactly, the alpha j.
Yes. It's the relative strength. It's the relative strength of the interaction with others versus interaction with yourself.
So I'm saying that I have these interaction couplings. They have an average that is, I call it mu, and I have to normalize it by d, total number of species. And then I have a variance of this guy that is sigma square over d. And then I have the reciprocity. I have these 3 parameters. The reciprocity 1, so if I take alpha ij and alpha ji, the correlation is
You'll have alpha ii, which is different.
yes, alpha I, okay, here I'm treating it, in the large D, it would not matter much if it is of the same scale.
You scale it with, yeah.
So here there's also a D, I guess. Right, so in principle, if you want to connect also to random matrix theory, there should be factors of maybe 2 in front of here. I will neglect this because for large D results, this doesn't matter much. But the point is that I'm scaling alpha II in the same way as alpha ij. Sometimes people don't do this. The self-interaction, they scale it differently than interactions between different species. Here, I'm not doing that.
Is it possible to prove that there's a unique fixed point in the phase on the left?
It's proven, but it's proven in a regime that is not, it doesn't go up to sigma critical. There's a factor of 2 or square root of 2, now I don't remember. So you stop a bit before, but you can mathematically prove the uniqueness of the fixed point. This is, I can send you references. It's Milan, Maida, and collaborators, it's mathematicians.
But it's expected to continue all the way up. It's
yes, yes, it's for technical reasons that they stopped before, but yes. Okay. Okay, so let me say something more about these 2 phases. So the phase of the unique fixed point, actually, we know quite a lot. So the idea is, of course, you have a random system. So the fixed point configuration will depend on the randomness. But there are concentration properties in this system when D goes to infinity. So you can identify properties of these fixed point configurations that actually will not fluctuate in this limit, but will converge to some fixed deterministic value. So just to give you an example, the diversity of the configuration is one of such properties. And the diversity is what? It's just counting how many species do I have that coexist in that given configuration, so which have an abundancy that is not 0, but strictly positive. And how do you get these properties? Well, there are several techniques. So you either do some cavity or you write down the dynamics in the d equal to infinity limit, and then you assume the existence of a fixed point, and you compute such properties. Mathematicians nowadays also apply AMP and look at convergence of this AMP algorithm. But let's say the bottom line is that we know properties of this fixed point. And also we know that as we go toward this critical sigma, what happens is that this unique fixed point is losing stability. So it's becoming actually marginally stable, exactly as sigma critical. So you lose the stability and the dynamics sees it. So you go below and you enter into this regime with fluctuations, which has also been studied in the literature. So I'll just say that there is here some difference with respect to switching on and off this migration. So in a way, this migration helps you regularizing a bit the dynamics. So if you don't have migration, you can argue that there is a dynamics that has this constant slowing down in time that is similar to what you see in glassy systems that you would naturally call aging, but which comes from, let's say, an origin that is not the same as in glasses. So it's not due to metastability here in the usual sense. You switch on this migration and you see that as long as your interactions are not symmetric, you have a signature of chaos. So this dynamics with persistent fluctuations actually looks chaotic. And you can make some more observation that I will comment on a bit more in the following, in this regime of small lambda. So what people have seen, for example, in this work, is that at each time during this, this chaotic evolution, if you want, you take a snapshot of your system and you see that the species cluster into two groups. So one that you would call abundant. So it means that the abundances of the corresponding species is of the order of 1. And one group of species which are nearly extinct, so that have an abundance that is of the order of lambda. And you see that in this plot. So at each instance, you have such, let's say, splitting. And if you look only at the subset of species that are abundant, what you can argue is that they seem to form some sort of subsystem that is at equilibrium. So that looks at a fixed point, and this fixed point seems to be dynamically stable with respect to fluctuations of abundances of the species that are there. But the point is that you don't just have the species that are there, you also have this subset of species with very small abundance. And due to fluctuations in your dynamics, this small abundance can grow, so these species can invade. And in fact, what you find is that if you look at time evolution, at each instance of time, the abundant species looks at some effective equilibrium. But you have this constant turnover of the species that are up there because you have this influx of the nearly extinct species that kick in and destabilize some of the species with high abundances. And so these configurations continuously changes in time. So if you think in terms of fixed points, this somehow tells you that, or you may interpret this as the fact that you have a lot of fixed points that are stable with respect to these internal fluctuations, and your dynamics moves in this manifold or close to this manifold of internally stable fixed points. And what gives you motion is the constant destabilization that comes from the migration of the species that were nearly extinct, but then kick in and grow in this ecosystem.
What degree is this just intuition and what degree is this calculations? Because we did the DMFT for the consumer resource models, and I don't think that's how either of these models work.
This picture of, let's say, surfing on the manifold of fixed points is just an interpretation of what they see in the dynamics. And the purpose of the calculation that I will show you is to try to, let's say, verify this by looking at statistics of fixed points and comparing with properties of the dynamics. And I will not give you an answer, yes, this is what happens. I just say what we find so far is compatible with this picture. But then there are more things that...
I mean, if I think of chaotic dynamics generally, then within the tractor, there are periodic orbits of all lengths, which are unstable, and somehow the chaos is surfing on those. And do you know that it's not that scenario?
No, I don't know. I mean, what you mean I need orbits and not simple fixed points?
Yeah, if you have if there's no fixed points that it goes anywhere near.
No, I mean, I don't know. It could be that I should build objects that are more complicated than just these fixed points. I think that.
Well, or if there are fixed points, but it doesn't go anywhere near them at long times.
Yes. So the peculiarity here, so I think in general, this is the case. I think in general, if you take a chaotic systems with chaotic dynamics, I don't think you can explain everything in terms of the fixed points. And we have work on some models that goes precisely in this direction. But this system here is a bit peculiar the moment you are focusing on the small migration regime. Because what you are saying is, okay, I have a system with no migration where this, let's say, fixed point exists and are stable if I have no migration. And now I look at the regime of the dynamics where I perturb a little bit, adding this migration. And this is the only source of instability. So if without migration, I would have these stable fixed points. I add migration. This destabilizes the fixed point. But maybe if the migration is small, I'm still living sufficiently close to them.
I guess I'm thinking of it the other way around. Is it's unstable with it says it's heteroclinic chaos without the migration, and with the migration it's stabilized chaos.
Now I think
maybe you're in a different. This is a different phase.
I think I'm much closer to what Daniel. Anyway, it's too technical.
What I talk about stability or instability is not with respect to chaos. Now I'm thinking about the fixed point, and I'm saying, in the limit.
Fixed points are the fixed points like in your heteroclinic chaos where you get closer and closer and closer to them.
Yes.
Then as soon as you put migration, you never go anywhere near those fixed points.
So what I'm saying is if I don't have migration, yes, I would go closer and closer to them. And in the picture, in this type of systems, I can identify regions where this fixed point, not as in the three-dimensional example that I showed you, are actually stable without migration. So if I fluctuate a bit the abundances of the species that are in that configuration, I go back to that configuration. But I have another instability that is if I insert some small abundance of species which are not there at the fixed point configuration.
Okay, so it's an unstable fixed point.
It's an unstable, but the instability is driven by the migration. And I think that this is connected to that type of dynamics that you find in the asymptotic limit of small migration.
I guess the question whether you add all the species initially or whether you're allowed to have some species being zero initially, even if it's unstable to bring in them in. Yes, question.
I think the way I think about this is I don't look at convergence to any fixed points. I just look at the fixed points where I kill some species and the other ones are there. This defines a fixed point. And then I see what is the response to adding species which are not there to the migration. And I see that this gives an instability, but without that, my fixed point would be stable. So is the dynamics precisely driven in that regime of small migration just by this instability? This is the picture. I don't know if it's...
Yeah, just to be sure, so this is different from the case of the rock paper.
Yes, exactly. So at least in some regime, I will have a fixed point that without introducing anything are stable. Whereas in the rock, paper, scissors, they are all unstable from the start. Is this clear more or less? Okay. Okay, so let me then, reformulate the question. I'll go a little bit fast. So given this scenario, so the first question that actually has not to do with out of equilibrium dynamics, but just with the transition is, I told you that at this transition point, my fixed point loses its dynamical stability. Can I say that it also loses uniqueness so that exactly at that point, I have an explosion in the number of fixed points in the same sense as in glassy systems, where I go from having a convex landscape to some to a situation in which I have an exponentially large number of metastable states. And then if this is the case, can I try to classify this population of fixed points to understand their stability, distinguishing between internal stability and stability with respect to invasions? I will go back to this. And by tuning parameters, do I see that there are transitions in the population of these fixed points? Do these transitions reflect somehow into changes in the dynamics of the system within this out of equilibrium phase? Okay, so these are the questions. Now I'm well over time, so I will perhaps not go through this in details, but there is, of course, an objection that is, why should one expect that this chaotic out of equilibrium dynamics is at all affected by the fixed point? So it's a dynamics that never reaches a fixed point, so why are you asking this question, why there is any hope that there is some connection. And let's say the hope comes a little bit from models of spin glasses where you can play this game. So I will not go through this in detail, but if you think about the type of models that Gerard was talking about yesterday, so these are models where you have a dynamics that is optimization of some free energy landscape. These are models which also exhibit dynamical transitions. So in this case, it's transition in temperature, so the strength of the noise. You know that if temperature is large, you are able to optimize your free energy and reach the equilibrium state that is the global minimum. If temperature is not large, then this equilibration is never reached. And in D equal to infinity dynamics, you are constantly out of equilibrium. You have this aging dynamics and so on. And here you can understand it. Of course, you can understand the transitions by statics. So you look at the structure of the underlying free energy landscape, and you see that you go from something that I would say is convex. So this is why the dynamics reaches the global minimum, to something that is highly non-convex with a lot of these trapping metastable states. And what the system does is to, let's say, surf in the vicinity of this, of some family of trapping metastable states. But what's more interesting in here is that you can understand what is the family among all these many metastable states. What are those that matter for the dynamics? So this is related to this notion of marginal stability. So you can write down measures that sample these metastable configurations. You can do statistics of them, and you can understand which family actually attracts the dynamics at large time. And this family of metastable states has some properties that you can connect to the dynamics. So you have a very nice story of matching, let's say, between statics and dynamics. Now, of course, you may say, okay, this is very nice, but you're talking about systems which are not spin glasses. So there are fundamental differences here. And one of the main ones is that I'm looking at systems which have non-conservative dynamics, right? So my interactions are not symmetric. So there is no landscape that this dynamics is trying to optimize.
But there is a potential limit of your model, or
yes, it's the gamma equal to 1.
Gamma equal to 1.
Exactly. And there is a spin glass. I mean, essentially.
That takes you away from that.
Exactly. The degree of asymmetry of my coupling. But still, okay, you may say, of course, well, as I have many of these attractors in a landscape that are stationary point of the landscapes where the force is equal to 0, also in my dynamical equation, I have a lot of fixed points. So do they tell me something? Okay, so now let me tell you what we do, and then I'll comment a bit on what we can say about the dynamics and consistency with the picture that I was mentioning at the beginning. So what we do is essentially a counting problem, right? So we have our equations of motion, and we want to understand how many solutions do we have. So these are fixed points or equilibria. So how many big vectors x star can we find that satisfy this system of equations for each component I, and also this condition of non-negativity, because of course, these are abundances. And we expect that if you have many of such solutions, what many means in this random Heidi system is exponentially many in the dimension. So you expect that there is some entropy associated to this fixed point configuration, and this entropy is what we call the complexity, or topological complexity. So it's 1 over d, the logarithm of the number of solutions of that big system of equation. And this is a quantity that has, again, this nice property of concentration when d goes to infinity. So it converges to its average, and this average, or the asymptotics of this average, is what we compute. This is called the quench complexity. So maybe just 2 very fast comments. So the first one is why is this not a trivial counting? So you may say, okay, but this is just essentially 2 to the n, because what do I have to do? I have this product structure, so I just have to fix a bunch of species which are 0. And for those that are non-zero, I have to impose that the force is equal to 0, but the force is linear in my variable, so I just have to invert my matrix A to solve a linear system of equations. So the moment I fix those that are 0, the other ones are immediately fixed by inverting this matrix. But I'm forgetting the constraint of positivity of the solution. So this doesn't work because this would give you some entries which are negative, whereas instead you want to interpret them as abundances, so you have to fulfill this constraint. So in math, this is related to so-called linear complementarity problems. And this is what makes the counting, let's say, non-trivial. And the second comment is that this is a problem where for most of the parameters, actually quench and annealed complexity, so the annealed complexity would be asymptotic of the average, do not match, so you have a different scaling of typical number of solutions and average number of solutions. Okay, so not only we want to, let's say, count this solution, but as I mentioned, we want to classify them. So now let me repeat the two notions of stability that I have in mind. So if I have such a fixed point configurations, the first thing that I want to check is whether this configuration is internally stable. So this means that if I take such configuration and I perturb the abundance of a species which is there, I want to go back dynamically to the same configuration. And this type of stability is controlled by this Jacobian stability matrix, which is a random matrix that we know how to treat. And of course, I ask that the sign, the real part of the eigenvalues, has a sign that is compatible with stability. With my notation, this should be negative. But then I also have the possibility, so some species have zero abundance in this configuration. What happens if I inject a little bit of abundances of those ones? So am I stable with respect to these invasions? And to be stable with respect to invasions, this is what people call uninvadability, I need to ask that the force or the effective growth rate associated to the species that are zero at the fixed point is negative in sign. Okay, so what I will do is to count all of these fixed points, and I will do a separate counting of the full population and only the full population of uninvadable ones. And if you come from maybe chaos theory, so the terminology, if I understood it later, is more longitudinal and transverse stability. So this comes from the fact that you have a problem with boundaries. So you're working in the positive region of your configuration space. Your fixed points lie at the intersection of these boundaries because some species are zero. And once you identify one of these fixed points at the boundary, you can ask stability along the boundary or stability if you go from the boundary to the bulk. And going from the boundary to the bulk is precisely this stability with respect to invasions, because you set the abundance from zero to non-zero, and you check if you go back to the boundary or if you move inside the bulk. Okay, then we also want to classify them in terms of properties. So I mentioned before this diversity, so the fraction of species which are there, and this actually, this is very well known. It turns out to be the only property that you need to know about this configuration to figure out the internal stability. So this is a simple argument of random matrix theory that is very similar to what Robert May was discussing already in his paper. So the idea is that you have a bound, so you have a critical value of the diversity, that is this expression, such that if you stay below, you can show that your fixed point is internally stable. If you go above, the fixed point becomes unstable. So you're trying to pack too many species, and this gives a dynamical instability. Okay, so in a nutshell, what we compute are these two quench complexity. So we do a counting of number of solutions at fixed values of these parameters, counting only those that are stable with respect to invasion, and then we compare it with the total number of fixed points, dropping this constraint of stability with respect to invasions. Okay, I will not tell you how we do the calculation actually, but I'll just conclude by showing you three results and then commenting on what these results tell us. So the first result is about this critical value that you see in the dynamics. So I was asking, so you know, this is a plot, this is sigma, so the strength of the disorder, if you want. This is the diversity phi, the fraction of coexisting species. And I was telling you there is a transition in the dynamics, so there is a sigma critical, and below the dynamics reaches a fixed point, and above the dynamics is characterized by these persistent fluctuations. And what I'm showing here is in this 3D plot is the complexity, so the log of the number of fixed points, but focusing only on the uninvadable. And you see that indeed this dynamical transition is a transition in the number of fixed points. So if you are below this critical value, there is a unique equilibrium that is stable with respect to invasion and also stable with respect to internal fluctuations. For each value of sigma, this equilibrium has a unique diversity. That is what I can compute with cavity and all those methods. And this diversity is given by this curve. And then the moment I enter this dynamical phase that is out of equilibrium, I start having exponentially many of these uninvadable fixed points. And in this plot, so this is for gamma equal to 0, so entries of this interaction matrix that are all uncorrelated. What you also see is that this complexity is supported in a range of diversities phis that lies above my May stability bound. So maybe you don't see it, but it is this dashed line. So what this is saying is that if I just look at the uninvadable fixed point for gamma small, here is gamma equal to 0, these fixed points are stable with respect to invasions, but they are unstable with respect to internal fluctuations. So this case is a bit similar to the paper rock Caesar one. Now, what about releasing this constraint of uninvadability? So now let me compute all the fixed points, not imposing these restrictions. I will find a different complexity curve, of course, much higher because I'm releasing some constraints. So I find much more solutions. And I actually find that these equilibria that are now unstable to invasions are always there. So also when the dynamics goes to this single fixed point, you still have a lot of these potential attractors that are nevertheless unstable to invasions from other species that are not there. And among them, there is always a fraction that is now internally stable. So I also have a huge population of these attractors that if I just look at the species that are there in that configuration, the fixed point looks stable, but the moment I inject a species that is not there, this gives a dynamical instability. And they are always there, and this type of population, of course, changes. So I was giving you plots at fixed gamma, that is this non-reciprocity parameter.
Subleading fraction of order 1 or of order 1 over d?
Is order 1 in the complexity. So exponentially, the number is exponentially smaller, but the complexity is positive.
But each
so they
one has a finite fraction of the species coexisting.
Yes.
Yeah.
The diversity is finite. Is order 1, yes.
Order d.
Exactly, yes. I normalize it by 1 over d. Yeah. Very good. So now, last result is what happens if I try to study these statistics varying this reciprocity parameter. So what I find if I do this is that there is another transition. Now, this is a transition in the statistics of fixed points within this region where the dynamics is out of equilibrium. And this transition separates this phase at small gamma, so small reciprocity, that we call fragile. So what we mean here is that if I'm interested in looking at equilibria that are internally stable with respect to fluctuations of the species that are there, what I find in this phase is that all of the fixed points that I find that look internally stable are actually unstable with respect to invasion. So I have situations where if I kill immigration, my dynamical equations of motion tell me potentially you have a lot of fixed points that are stable, but all of these, the moment I switch on a little bit of immigration, they are necessarily dynamically destabilized while opening this system. Whereas if I increase a bit this reciprocity, I enter into this other phase where I do find instead a fraction of my fixed points, which is stable in both sense. So which they may really attract the dynamics, and the dynamics can stay there at least if I do a linearization around these configurations. So this may suggest some sort of transition in the dynamics as you tune this non-reciprocity. So I think this population is more compatible with what I was trying to explain in words. So with the dynamics where you have this space of equilibria that are internally stable, at each time it seems that the system is there, but then there is this constant flux of immigrants that destabilizes you.
In this exploration of various regimes due to non-reciprocity, do you encounter exceptional lines, or at this boundary, some of these boundaries that you're drawing, lines of exceptional point in an operator that I somehow missed? Or
no, this is no. So this line, you mean here?
Yeah, or anywhere else in that diagram that I cannot really see it myself, but
no, the way
something that corresponds to a hidden crossover to a dynamical phase.
No, I don't know. I don't see. The way I see this line is just entropy. So I look at the entropy of this fixed point, and I see that the population of those which are stable in both my definitions has an entropy that goes to 0. Now, whether this tells me that the dynamics starting from random initial condition is attracted by this fixed point and sees these changes in fixed points, and I have a crossover in the dynamics, this I don't know, and it is
somewhat intuitively, when you increase the reciprocity in almost any model I know of, some sort of rotation starts in some space. Where
I'm looking.
Is it there somehow in this?
No, I'm restricting for reasons that don't make sense. It was just because I did it to gamma between 0 and 1. So I don't have anti-correlation.
Oh, I see.
So I think that in the regime gamma negative, I would see this type of
thing. But for simplicity.
For some reason, we looked only at yeah, we should do the gamma negative. Okay. But yes, you're right.
Is there a notion where these fragile states are marginal and the robust are gapped, or that's not what's going on?
Yes, so in the reciprocal limit, the most numerous are marginal. The most numerous among the stable one are marginal. So this is very similar to what you have in glasses. In this phase, you do have a population of marginal ones. You do have a population of stable ones. So yes, here you do. Here you don't because, okay, it depends on whether you look at the invadable or uninvadable. So if you don't care about stability with respect to invasions, you always have a fraction of this fixed point that are marginally stable internally with respect to internal fluctuations. If I do restrict only to the uninvadable ones, here you have no marginal ones. They are all linearly unstable. And here you do have marginal ones. Yes, okay, let me just say, and this is very weak, how we say something about dynamics. We do only one basic check, that is, if the picture that I told you in words is correct, then at least you should see that you look at the dynamics. So the dynamics is constantly fluctuating, but again, there are some quantities that stay fixed, also in this out of equilibrium regime. One of these quantities is the diversity, so you can extract so you fluctuate, there is turnover between the species with high abundancy, but the number of species up there, the fraction actually, in the large D limit is fixed. So if you imagine that this is a dynamics where you're going somehow close to this fixed point that are internally stable but unstable to invasions, you should at least find an exponentially large population of those at the diversity that the dynamics tells you. And this is something that we check. So the only compatibility statement that I can make is that this picture is consistent with the statistical analysis that we do, because we see that at the diversity selected by the dynamics, we have an exponentially large population of these fixed points, which have the stability property that are compatible to this picture of the dynamics. No more than this, in the sense that you would also say, okay, to make the statement strong, what is this diversity? Can I predict it from the fixed point? And in fact, this we don't yet know how to do. So let me bring, this is my conclusion. So there is one question that, of course, if you want to make this more convincing, you should be able to say not just that your dynamics happens in a region where you have a lot of these fixed points, but also that among the population of fixed points, you can really identify which ones matter for the dynamics. So you can understand what is the selection rule of the fixed point that the dynamics sees. And this is a very general question that you can ask for several models. Here, I think that this may come from some sort of balance condition, but maybe I will comment this in the following. And the other thing that one should check is, okay, I told you about transitions in the statistics of these fixed points. Do I see this in the dynamics? And this is something we are working on. So you you do simulations, you do see that simulations here give you a dynamics that never sees any fixed point. Here you have exponentially many stable fixed points. Finite size dynamics sees these fixed points, but maybe the Bayesian of attraction of these fixed points goes to 0 when d goes to infinity, so this may be just a finite size effect, of course. These are all things that
What's your conjecture?
that you don't see, that you don't go there with the random initial condition. And that this is so the basing from random initial condition, you don't see them, you initialize in a smart way, and then you see them. This is what I think. Okay, I think that's.
Yeah, I'm a little bit confused about the gamma definition. So the fully symmetric case where the alpha ji is equal to the alpha ij corresponds to gamma equals sigma squared.
No.
Equals 1.
Gamma equals 1.
Yes, exactly. Gamma equal 1. Sorry, there's a sigma square here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, you're right.
Okay, so in that case, so you're on the upper bound of
exactly of my,
and all the fixed points are disconnected and unstable, right?
Exactly.
So,
and I have a family. You have also unstable ones.
Does your counting agree with the capacity of the Hopfield model? Symmetric interactions.
Yes, but why Hopfield model?
Say it again.
Why Hopfield model?
Every memory is one of your species. Every memory corresponds to a fixed point. And people have used, replicas and cavity methods to compute the capacity of the Hopfield model.
Yes.
So I was wondering whether your counting of the number of allowed fixed points would agree with that.
This I don't know, but I also don't see. You see that how to map.
It feels more like consumer resource. Oh, but even there, it doesn't. It's the discreteness and the fact that species go extinct.
In an Hopfield like
order e to the d.
But it's order e to the d here, yes.
What happens here is you completely forget all the memories. The fact that things can go extinct, makes the behavior very different.
It's like if neurons would drop out of the whole thing, dynamically self-organized.
So it's aging in a different sense. It's the,
Yeah, maybe because I think I didn't understand.
So if you fix the diversity of the fixed points that you look at to the one that is found, like the fit top, like can you recover the other observables? For example, like can you describe the statistics of the fixed point if you know, for example, the diversity?
Yes, very good. We should check. We didn't check because they don't look at the order parameters that we naturally have access to, which are magnetization, so average abundance, and the second moment of this vector.
I mean, but they know it, they just don't plot it in the paper.
Yes, but that's, for example, if we did it in some other model that doesn't have this boundary structure, so it's not a model of population dynamics, this is the reference, this reference here, is a model, is an asymmetric version of the p-spin with some ferromagnetic term, is a model that has chaos. There you can ask the same questions and you find that the answer is no.
Okay.
So the properties, so if the dynamics selects fixed points, for sure they are not the most numerous. So an average measure over all of the fixed point doesn't peak at the one that the dynamics goes to, and this you may not be surprised. But even if you condition on one of the properties, the most numerous ones don't have the other properties that match. So
I think it's time for a break. I bet there are more questions. I think we can thank the speaker again.